What happens when a racist man in a MAGA hat punches a black man, unknowingly assaulting the mayor? Get ready for an intense story that might hit too close to home for many of you. The afternoon air was thick with the hum of everyday life as Mayor James Parker strolled into the suburban grocery store. Clad in a casual button-up shirt and jeans, he looked like any other shopper, his cart already half filled with groceries. For James, small errands like this were a way to stay grounded, a brief respite from the pressures of leading a city. At the self-checkout stations near the entrance, a man in a red MAGA hat was gesturing wildly, phone pressed to his ear. Doug Simmons's voice cut through the murmur of the store like nails on a chalkboard. "I'm telling you," Doug said loudly, not caring who listened, "this country's gone to hell. You can't walk 3 steps without seeing some idiot running the show who shouldn't be there." Doug glanced over his shoulder, locking eyes with James for a fraction of a second before turning back to his groceries. "Bet even this guy thinks he's in charge of everything now," he added, his tone casual, almost conversational. James froze, his hand hovering over a loaf of bread he was about to scan. The comment was so brazenly dismissive, so casually racist, that it caught him off guard. Straightening up, James spoke evenly, his voice carrying just enough authority to quiet the air around them. "Excuse me, but I don't think that's something you'd want to say in front of me. Or anyone else, for that matter." Doug turned, his lips curling into a smirk, as he took James in. "Relax, buddy. It's just a joke. You people are always so sensitive." James's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "And people like you always think they can get away with saying things like that because they slap the word joke on it." Nearby shoppers were beginning to pause, their eyes darting between James and Doug. The atmosphere grew tense, the kind of tension that made strangers linger just to see what would happen next. "Why don't you just mind your own business?" Doug snapped, his bravado faltering slightly as James stood his ground. James smiled faintly. "When your business involves spreading ignorance and hate, I'm afraid it becomes everyone's business." Doug glared, his face reddening, his phone now forgotten in his hand. "Well, aren't you the hero today?" The seeds of a confrontation had been planted, and the checkout area of the grocery store had become a stage for a battle of words that was about to escalate. Doug's laughter filled the air, sharp and grating, as he leaned on the self-checkout station. "You know, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, but too scared to say. This whole country's been catering to people who think they're entitled to everything. Bet you love playing that card, huh?" James inhaled deeply, keeping his voice measured. "You've got some nerve assuming you know anything about me. Let me give you some advice. Think carefully about what you say next." Doug smirked, his MAGA hat bobbing slightly as he shifted his weight. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I offend your delicate feelings? You people sure do love being the victim." Nearby shoppers exchanged uneasy glances. A woman with a phone discreetly tilted her screen, capturing the exchange as Kendra, the store associate, edged closer. Her hand hovered over the store phone, eyes darting nervously between the two men. James's jaw tightened, but his tone remained calm. "Victim? No, Doug. See, that's where you're wrong. People like me are survivors. We've been surviving people like you for generations." Doug's grin faltered, the edges of his smug demeanor cracking. He glanced around, noticing for the first time that all eyes were on him. "Oh, you've got an audience now, huh? Must feel real proud, stirring up drama in a grocery store." "You're the only one stirring anything," James countered, gesturing slightly toward Doug's unscanned groceries. "Maybe focus on getting that checkout to work, instead of embarrassing yourself." A small chuckle rippled through the growing crowd, and Doug's face turned crimson. "Don't get cocky," he growled. "You don't know who you're talking to." James's lips curved into a faint smile. "Funny, I was just about to say the same thing." Doug's gaze narrowed, and he took a step closer, lowering his voice. "I run Simmons Construction. Big company in town. Probably building the roads you drive on, pal. So, don't act like you're someone special." "Oh, Simmons Construction?" James said, feigning surprise. "You've got a bid with the city, don't you?" Doug blinked, momentarily thrown. "Yeah, so what? That's none of your business. James tilted his head slightly. I'd say it's very much my business. Before Doug could respond, Kendra's voice cut through the tension. Sir, she said, addressing Doug with deliberate firmness, if you're not going to check out, I'll need you to step aside for other customers. Doug turned on her, his expression twisted with irritation. Why don't you stay out of it, sweetheart? Just do your job and let me handle this. James's fists clenched at his sides, but his voice was razor sharp. Don't talk to her like that. Yeah? What are you going to do about it? Doug snapped, leaning forward slightly, his breath reeking of hostility. James held his ground, his voice calm but laced with authority. You'd be surprised. Doug chuckled darkly, shaking his head. Oh, I get it now. You're one of those guys who thinks he's better than everyone else. I've seen your type before. Big talk, no action, just another nobody. James took a step forward, closing the gap between them. His voice dropped to a low, steady tone. Nobody, huh? Let me tell you something, Doug. People like me don't need to act better than you. The truth does all the work for us. Doug glared, his fists balling up at his sides. His voice rose again, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. The truth? The truth is, you're nothing. You think you've got it hard? Try being a white man in this country these days. No one gives a damn about us anymore. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, and Kendra took another cautious step closer to James. Sir, she said, her voice a little firmer now, this isn't the place for that. If you don't leave, I'll have to call security. Doug whirled around to face her again, shouting, Call them! I've done nothing wrong. This guy's the one causing a scene, acting like he owns the place. James let out a dry laugh, folding his arms across his chest. Ironic, coming from the guy yelling at a store clerk and holding up the line. Doug's face was almost purple with rage now. He stepped even closer, practically nose to nose with James. You think you're so smart, don't you? Walking around like you're untouchable. Well, let me tell you something. You're not. Guys like me, we built this country. We'll take it back, too. James raised a single brow, his voice cool and unshaken. Take it back? Doug, it's people like you who are why it needs taking back in the first place. The crowd gasped, a few stifled laughs breaking through the tension. Doug, his pride visibly wounded, looked ready to explode. But instead, he took a step back. His hands twitched, as though itching for a fight. But the presence of witnesses held him at bay. At least for now. Kendra placed her hand on the store phone, speaking softly to James. Do you want me to call someone? It looks like he's about to lose it. James shook his head slightly, keeping his eyes locked on Doug. Not yet. He'll either back down or dig himself into a deeper hole. Doug, glaring at James, muttered under his breath, You don't scare me. James's reply was calm and measured. I don't need to scare you. The truth will do that on its own. The tension in the room thickened, the confrontation simmering just below a boiling point. The punch hadn't come yet, but the threat of it loomed heavy in the air. Doug's sneer grew wider as he leaned closer to James, his face a mix of mockery and rage. You sure have a lot to say for someone who doesn't know when to shut up. James stood his ground, his posture calm but unyielding. You sure have a lot of anger for someone who walked into this store without a reason to be mad. Doug barked a laugh, the sound grating and filled with venom. You think I'm mad? No, I'm just tired. Tired of guys like you who think they can walk around like they own the place. James tilted his head slightly, his voice cutting through the tension. And what exactly is it you think I own, Doug? An ability to think before I speak? I'm happy to loan you some if that's what you're missing. A few stifled laughs rippled through the crowd of shoppers now gathered near the self-checkout area. Doug's face flushed deeper, his fists clenching at his sides as he glanced around, realizing he was being watched. Laugh it up, Doug growled, his voice rising. You don't scare me. You're nothing but a loudmouth who doesn't know his place. James's brow furrowed, but his voice remained even. And where exactly do you think my place is, Doug? Because the way I see it, my place is anywhere I choose to stand. Doug's smirk faltered as the words landed. He stepped closer, his chest puffed out in an attempt to regain control of the situation. Your place is somewhere else, somewhere far from people like me who built this country. James exhaled sharply, a bitter laugh escaping him. Built this country? You mean people like you who think they're owed something just for showing up? Doug took another step forward, his voice dropping into a menacing growl. You think you're better than me? James met Doug's gaze, unflinching. No, Doug. I don't think I'm better than you. I just refuse to let you drag me down to your level. Doug's breath hitched, his eyes darting to the crowd of onlookers. A few phones were now openly recording, red lights blinking. He turned back to James, his face twisted with fury and embarrassment. You think you're so clever, standing here mouthing off while everyone watches. James's tone sharpened, clever enough to know when someone's trying to pick a fight they can't win. Doug's hand twitched at his side, and for a moment it seemed like he might lash out. Instead, he slammed his hand down on the self-checkout station, rattling the machine. You're real smug for someone who doesn't belong here. James raised an eyebrow. Doesn't belong here? That's funny. I don't remember asking for your permission to shop for groceries. Kendra, the store associate, finally spoke up from a few feet away. Sir, she said, addressing Doug with deliberate firmness, if you're not going to check out, I'll have to ask you to leave. Doug whirled on her, his voice dripping with disdain. Why don't you mind your own business, sweetheart? Stick to bagging groceries or whatever it is you're supposed to be doing. James's fists clenched, but he stayed composed, his voice cutting through Doug's tirade. That's enough. You're angry, you're embarrassed, and you're trying to take it out on everyone around you. But trust me, Doug, no one here is impressed. Doug turned back to James, his face a mask of fury. You think you're so tough, don't you? Hiding behind your words, acting like you're untouchable. James took a single step forward, closing the distance between them. Tough? No, Doug. Tough is standing up to bullies like you and not letting them get the last word. Doug's chest heaved as he struggled to come up with a response. His hand twitched again, and the tension in the air thickened. The crowd was completely silent now, every eye fixed on the two men. Kendra's hand hovered over the store phone, her fingers trembling as she waited for the inevitable. You know what? Doug spat, his voice loud and angry. I've had enough of this. He stepped forward, shoving James hard in the chest. James staggered back, but didn't fall. His gaze locked on Doug with a steady intensity. Big mistake, James said quietly, his voice low and dangerous. Doug smirked, stepping back slightly. What are you going to do about it? Call the cops? Go ahead. You're nothing. Nobody's going to listen to you. Kendra, now visibly upset, dialed the store phone. I'm calling security, she said, her voice trembling but firm. James held up a hand, his eyes never leaving Doug. Not yet. Let him dig his own hole. Doug laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You've got nothing on me. You think standing here looking all high and mighty makes you better than me? No, James replied, his voice steady. What makes me better than you, Doug, is that I don't need to hit people to prove a point. The crowd murmured in agreement, the tension in the air still electric. Doug's face twisted in rage, his body trembling as he struggled to contain himself. The moment was on a knife's edge, the threat of violence hanging heavy in the air. Doug's breathing grew heavier, his chest rising and falling as he glared at James. The silence in the store was suffocating, broken only by the occasional beep of a self-checkout machine in the distance. But no one was paying attention to their groceries anymore. You think this is funny? Doug suddenly barked, his voice rising an octave. You standing there, acting all righteous while you've got everyone recording me like I'm the bad guy? His eyes darted to the onlookers, and his face twisted with fury. Turn those damn cameras off. This isn't a sideshow. James remained calm, his hands at his sides, his voice steady. No one told you to act like this, Doug. You're the one making a spectacle of yourself. Doug took a step closer, jabbing a finger toward James. You don't get to talk down to me. You think you're better than me? You're not. You're just another... He cut himself off, his mouth twisting into an ugly smirk. Never mind. You know exactly what you are. James's jaw tightened, but he refused to react to the bait. Go ahead and say it, Doug. Let everyone here see you for who you really are." Doug's face turned beet red, and he threw his hands in the air, shouting now, "This is what's wrong with this damn country. People like you running around thinking you can do whatever you want, like you're untouchable. Well, newsflash, pal, you're not." Nearby, Kendra clutched the phone, visibly trembling but still standing her ground. "Sir, I need you to leave the store now, or I'm calling security." Doug spun toward her, his voice booming. "Shut up. You don't get to tell me what to do. I'm not leaving until I'm damn good and ready." James took a step forward, his tone dropping to a dangerous calm. "That's enough. You don't get to yell at her. You don't get to bully anyone here. If you can't control yourself, leave before you make this worse for yourself." Doug turned back to James, his eyes wild with rage. "Worse for myself? You don't get to tell me what to do. Who do you think you are, huh? You think you're better than me? Smarter than me?" James's eyes narrowed, his voice sharper now. "Smarter than a man who's digging his own grave in front of a crowd?" "Absolutely." The crowd stirred, a few quiet laughs rippling through the tension. Doug's face contorted, and his hands trembled as he clenched his fists. His voice rose to a fever pitch, shrill and irrational. "You're nothing! Nothing! You think you can walk in here and make me look bad? No, 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 that's not how this works. I'm not the problem. You are. People like you are the problem." James's voice cut through Doug's rant, calm but commanding. "People like me? What does that mean, Doug? Say it." Doug's lips curled into a sneer, his voice venomous. "You know damn well what it means. You people always playing the victim, always making it about race. You've got everything handed to you, while guys like me work for it. And then you have the nerve to lecture me?" The words hung heavy in the air, a collective gasp rippling through the crowd. Kendra took a small step back, her hand shaking as she clutched the phone. James tilted his head slightly, his voice low and cutting. "You've been standing here yelling and screaming, making a fool of yourself, and you have the nerve to call me entitled? Doug, you're not just embarrassing yourself. You're showing everyone here exactly why the world is the way it is. And guess what? It's not because of people like me." Doug's body trembled with barely contained fury, his fists clenching and unclenching as the crowd stared, phones still recording every word. Finally, something in him snapped. "You smug son of a—" Doug lunged forward, his fist flying through the air. The punch landed squarely on James's jaw, the sickening thud echoing through the silent store. James staggered back a step, his hand instinctively going to his face. The crowd gasped, several people stepping forward to intervene, but James held up a hand to stop them. Straightening slowly, James met Doug's gaze, his expression calm and controlled despite the redness blooming on his jaw. "You really just did that," he said quietly, his voice filled with quiet disbelief. Doug's chest heaved, his fist still clenched as he stood there, glaring at James like a predator waiting for a reaction. Kendra didn't hesitate this time. She pressed the store phone to her ear, her voice shaking as she spoke. "We need security and the police at the front. Now." Doug's smirk returned, though it was weaker now, the weight of what he'd done starting to sink in. "Go ahead," he muttered. "Call the cops. I don't care." James wiped the corner of his mouth, where a faint smear of blood had appeared. His voice was low and steady, each word carrying the weight of the moment. "Big mistake, Doug. Big mistake." The tension in the air shifted as the weight of what had just happened settled over the room. The crowd, once murmuring, fell silent, every eye fixed on Doug as the sound of approaching footsteps signaled the arrival of store security. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed across the store as two security guards rushed toward the commotion. The first guard, a stocky man with a badge pinned to his chest, immediately took in the scene. The crowd of shocked onlookers, James standing tall with a visible mark on his jaw, and Doug, still breathing heavily, his fists clenched at his sides. "Sir, step back!" the guard barked, his voice sharp and commanding as he approached Doug. "Right now!" Doug spun to face them, his expression a mixture of rage and panic. Oh, great. Now you're sending mall cops after me? What are you gonna do? You think you can touch me? The second guard, a lean woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward. Sir, you need to calm down and wait here until the police arrive. Put your hands where we can see them. Doug sneered, throwing his arms wide in defiance. You want my hands? Here they are. He waved them dramatically before jabbing a finger toward James. But you better deal with him too. He started this whole damn thing. He thinks he's untouchable. James didn't flinch, his gaze steady as he locked eyes with Doug. No one started anything except you, Doug. Everyone here saw it. That's a lie, Doug shouted, his voice cracking as his words grew more desperate. You're all against me. This is a setup. He's playing you, all of you. You're just eating it up because he's got you brainwashed. The stocky guard stepped closer, his hand resting near the baton on his hip. Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Step back and keep your hands visible. Doug let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Oh, now I'm the bad guy. That's rich. Just because he stood there running his mouth, I'm the one who's getting blamed? Unbelievable. The female guard motioned to her partner. We need to restrain him until the police get here. He's escalating. Doug's eyes widened as the two guards stepped toward him. You're kidding me. Restrain me? For what? I didn't do anything wrong. He stepped back, his hands now clenched into fists, his entire body trembling with fury. You assaulted someone in front of a dozen witnesses, the stocky guard replied, his tone firm but calm. Now, don't make this harder than it has to be. Doug roared, his voice bouncing off the walls of the store. This is bullshit. He provoked me. He pushed me to it. You're all on his side. His words were practically incoherent now, more guttural than articulate as the guards moved in. The male guard grabbed Doug's arm, attempting to pull it behind his back, but Doug thrashed violently. Get off me! Get your damn hands off me! I'm not going anywhere! His voice was shrill, filled with a mixture of anger and fear. The female guard grabbed Doug's other arm, and together they pinned him against the nearest checkout station. His MAGA hat tumbled to the floor as he continued to struggle. You're making a mistake. Do you know who I am? I'll sue all of you. You can't treat me like this. Stop resisting! The male guard barked, his grip tightening. Doug's face pressed against the hard plastic of the checkout station, his voice muffled but still frantic. I'm not resisting. This is harassment, Doug screamed. He's the one you should be arresting. He's the problem. James stood a few feet away, his arms crossed as he watched the scene unfold. Despite the ache in his jaw, his expression remained calm, his silence speaking volumes. The crowd murmured, a mix of shock, indignation, and quiet satisfaction rippling through the onlookers. Kendra, still clutching the store phone, spoke softly into it. They've got him restrained now. Can you let the officers know? Thanks. She hung up and approached James cautiously. Are you okay, sir? That looked like a pretty hard hit. James nodded, offering a faint smile. I'm fine. I've dealt with worse. But thank you, Kendra. You handled this better than most would have. Doug's muffled screams continued as the guards tightened their grip on him. You think this is over? It's not over. You're all gonna regret this when my lawyers get involved. I'll have all your jobs. The female guard leaned closer, her voice calm but firm. Sir, you need to stay quiet and wait for the police. The more you yell, the worse you're making this for yourself. Doug thrashed one last time, letting out a guttural growl before finally going limp, his breathing heavy and erratic. His face was beet red, his hair disheveled, and his eyes darted around wildly as if searching for someone to validate his rage. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, and the male guard glanced toward the entrance. Cops are here. Let's keep him restrained until they take over. James took a deep breath, glancing at Kendra. Thank you for calling them. You did the right thing. Kendra's lips tightened into a small smile. Someone had to. People like him don't get to just walk away from this. The sirens wailed louder as the police arrived, their presence signaling the next phase of the confrontation. Doug, now subdued but still muttering curses under his breath, was about to face the consequences of his actions in full view of the crowd. The wail of sirens grew louder, reverberating through the glass doors at the front of the store. Shoppers parted like a wave as two uniformed officers entered briskly, taking in the scene. Doug was still pinned against the checkout station, muttering under his breath while the security guards maintained their firm grip. One officer, a tall man with a commanding presence, approached the guards. "What's going on here?" he asked, his eyes flicking between Doug, the guards, and James, who stood a short distance away with his arms crossed. The male security guard spoke first. "This man assaulted a customer. He's been resisting us since we intervened. Witnesses and video footage confirm what happened." Doug's head shot up, his face red and glistening with sweat. "That's a damn lie. I was provoked. He's the one who started this." He jerked his chin toward James, his voice rising again. "They're all against me. They've set me up." The officer raised a hand, his voice calm but firm. "Sir, calm down. You'll get your chance to explain." He turned to the crowd, addressing the nearest witnesses. "Can anyone confirm what happened here?" Kendra stepped forward, her phone in hand. "I saw the whole thing. That man," she pointed to Doug, "shoved and punched him." She glanced at James, her voice steady. "He didn't do anything to provoke it. I've got video proof if you need it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the onlookers. A few others nodded and stepped forward, offering their phones to the officers. The second officer, a younger woman, collected one of the phones and reviewed the footage quickly. Her expression hardened as she watched, and she glanced at her partner. "It's clear. He's the aggressor." The first officer turned back to Doug. "Sir, I need you to cooperate. You're under arrest for assault." Doug's eyes widened in disbelief. "Arrest? Arrest? Are you kidding me? For what? For defending myself?" The officer ignored him, nodding to the security guards. "We'll take it from here." As the guards released him, Doug tried to twist away, but the officers were faster. They cuffed him smoothly, ignoring his protests as he squirmed and shouted, "This is a joke! You're all in on this! This guy!" Doug spat the words, glaring at James. "He's nobody! Just some punk who thinks he can push people like me around." James stepped forward slowly, his presence commanding attention. His expression was calm, but a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Nobody, huh?" Doug glared, still defiant despite the cuffs around his wrists. "Damn right! You're just some arrogant little—" James reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek business card. Holding it up between two fingers, he let the light catch the embossed lettering before handing it to the arresting officer. The officer's eyes flicked to the card and then widened slightly in recognition. He straightened, his tone shifting to one of respect. "Mayor Parker." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd, shoppers exchanging wide-eyed looks as the weight of the revelation hit. Phones shifted angles to capture the moment as Doug froze, his mouth hanging open in stunned disbelief. What did he just say?" Doug stammered, his voice cracking. James crossed his arms, his smirk widening. "That's right, Doug. You just assaulted the mayor of this city." Doug's jaw worked, but no sound came out. His face turned an alarming shade of red as he sputtered, "No, you're lying. This can't—" "Oh, it's true," James interrupted smoothly, his tone sharp enough to cut. "You've spent the last 15 minutes shouting at the top of your lungs, digging yourself into a hole in front of an entire store full of witnesses. And now, you're finding out you couldn't have picked a worse target for your little tantrum." The officer holding Doug adjusted his grip. "Mayor Parker, would you like to press charges?" James nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely. People like Doug need to understand there are consequences for their actions." Doug tried to twist around to face James, his voice frantic now. "You can't do this. You're making a big mistake. I didn't know who you were." James's expression didn't change. "You didn't know, and you didn't care. But Doug, here's the thing. Your ignorance isn't a defense. It's just part of the problem." The officers began guiding Doug toward the door, his protests echoing through the store. "This isn't over. You hear me? You can't get away with this. I'll sue. I'll ruin you." James watched him go, his posture relaxed, the smirk still lingering on his face. The moment the doors swung shut behind Doug, The tension in the store broke, replaced by a wave of murmurs and scattered applause. Kendra approached James hesitantly, her voice soft but filled with admiration. "You handled that better than anyone else could have. Are you okay?" James glanced at her, his smile warm now. "I'm fine. Thank you for stepping in when it mattered. You made sure this didn't get worse." The crowd slowly began to disperse, shoppers returning to their carts, though many lingered to thank James or simply stare in awe at the unexpected turn of events. James turned back to the self-checkout station, calmly picking up the loaf of bread he'd dropped earlier. His voice carried just enough for Kendra to hear as he scanned it. "Now, where was I?" The store lights dimmed behind James as he exited into the parking lot, the commotion of the altercation left behind. He stood for a moment, watching the police cruiser carrying Doug speed off, Doug's muffled shouts barely audible through the glass. The tension in James's jaw reminded him of the punch, but his mind was focused elsewhere. "Take me to the station," James said, as he slid into the passenger seat of his waiting car. He adjusted his tie and leaned back, the faint smile on his lips betraying a hint of satisfaction. The ride was quick, and soon James walked through the doors of the bustling police station. Officers moved with purpose, but the noise of their work couldn't drown out one unmistakable voice echoing from the holding area. "This isn't fair!" Doug's angry drawl rang out. "You people don't know who you're dealing with. I've got connections. You'll regret this." James approached the duty officer at the front desk, who straightened immediately upon recognizing him. "Mayor Parker," the officer greeted, a mixture of surprise and deference in his tone. "The suspect is in holding. We've got witness statements, video evidence, and security reports ready to go. We're processing the charges now." "Good," James replied calmly. "I'd like to see him." The officer hesitated before gesturing down the hall. "Right this way, sir." The closer James got to the holding area, the louder Doug's voice became, his words a chaotic mix of insults and self-pity. "This is a setup. That guy provoked me. You're all gonna pay for this when my lawyers get involved." James stepped into view, his hands in his pockets, his expression calm and unreadable. Doug froze mid-rant, his face a mix of fury and disbelief as his eyes locked on James. "You!" Doug spat, rushing to the bars. "What the hell are you doing here? You here to gloat?" James stopped a few feet away, tilting his head slightly. "Not at all, Doug. I'm here to make sure everything is handled properly. Accountability's important, don't you think?" Doug gripped the bars, his knuckles white as his face turned red. "Accountability? You've got some nerve talking about accountability. You provoked me. This is your fault." James raised an eyebrow, his tone as steady as ever. "Doug, you threw the punch. You shouted racial slurs in a grocery store. All I did was stand there and let you show everyone who you really are." Doug's face darkened further, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You don't know who you're messing with. I own Simmons Construction. You know how much money I make? How many people I employ? I've got a bid in with the city right now for a multi-million-dollar project. You think this little stunt is gonna stop me?" James let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "Doug, I know exactly who you are. I knew the moment you started screaming in that store." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping just enough to make Doug lean in, too. "And I also know that bid you're so proud of. I reviewed it personally." Doug's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. "What? What are you saying?" James straightened, his calm demeanor unwavering. "I'm saying that your actions tonight aren't just an embarrassment for you. They're a liability for your company. And as the mayor, I can't, in good conscience, award a major city contract to someone who's shown such a blatant lack of respect and professionalism." The color drained from Doug's face as the full weight of James's words settled on him. You can't do that. That bid is locked in. You don't have the authority." James interrupted smoothly, his voice cutting through Doug's protests. "Oh, I absolutely have the authority. And trust me, Doug, the last thing the city needs is a contractor who can't control his temper in public." Doug stumbled back slightly, sinking onto the bench in the holding cell. His bravado crumbled as he muttered to himself, "This isn't happening. This can't be happening. James took a slow step closer, his voice calm but unrelenting. You've spent all night screaming about how important you are, how much you've built. But let me tell you something, Doug. Tonight, all anyone is going to remember is how quickly you tore yourself down. Doug's head snapped up, his face flushed with desperation. Look, I didn't know who you were, okay? I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. You've got to give me a break here. James tilted his head slightly, his tone sharp. A break, Doug? You didn't care who I was when you were shouting insults in that store. You didn't care when you threw that punch. And now you expect me to care about your excuses? The officer who had escorted James stepped forward. Mayor Parker, the charges have been finalized. We're ready for your signature to move forward. James nodded, taking a step back from the bars. Thank you, officer. Let's proceed. He turned to leave, but paused, glancing back over his shoulder at Doug. By the way, Doug, you might want to start thinking about a new line of work. Something tells me this city won't be needing your services anytime soon. Doug sputtered, his words incoherent as James walked away. His protests echoed faintly behind him as James exited the holding area, the corners of his mouth curving into a faint, satisfied smile. The next morning, the video of the grocery store confrontation was everywhere. Recorded from multiple angles by shoppers, the footage showed Doug yelling, shoving, and eventually punching James. The audio captured every detail. Doug's racial slurs, his unhinged accusations, and his loud declarations about people like you ruining this country. The video ended with security pinning Doug to the counter as bystanders murmured in disbelief. By noon, the story had spread to major news outlets. Headlines like, "Local contractor arrested for assaulting mayor," and "Caught on camera. Racist outburst leads to arrest," dominated TV and social media. Doug's face, distorted with rage, was impossible to miss. His words were dissected in talk shows and online comment sections, with commentators pointing out the irony of his behavior given his company's reliance on city contracts. James's phone buzzed continuously with messages of support from colleagues, friends, and community leaders. His press secretary had already scheduled a statement for later that day. When the time came, James stood in front of City Hall, his jaw still slightly bruised, but his posture steady and composed. What happened last night was unfortunate, but it highlights a larger issue we all must confront, James said, his voice measured. This is not just about me. It's about how we choose to treat one another as a community. Accountability matters, and I trust the justice system to handle this appropriately. The questions came quickly. Reporters asked about Doug, the city bid, and whether this would affect future projects. James's response was firm. The city holds contractors to the highest ethical standards. Professionalism and respect are non-negotiable. Based on the events last night, Simmons Construction's pending bid is now under review. The message was clear. Doug's behavior wasn't just a personal failure, it was a professional liability. By evening, the repercussions were in full swing. Simmons Construction's website and social media pages were flooded with angry comments, calls for boycotts, and demands for accountability. Within hours, one of Doug's largest clients announced they were terminating their contract. "We do not condone the behavior displayed by Mr. B. Fowler Simmons," their statement read. Other clients quickly followed suit. By the next morning, Doug's company was in freefall. Local businesses severed ties, and Doug's business partners issued a statement condemning his actions. The financial fallout was immediate. Without the city bid or its major contracts, Simmons Construction faced insolvency. Outside City Hall, James attended a community fundraiser. The crowd greeted him with applause, their admiration for his composure evident. Throughout the evening, attendees approached him to express their support. An older woman shook his hand firmly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for standing up to people like that," she said. "You showed everyone how to handle hate with dignity." James smiled, nodding. Sometimes the best response to anger is calm. Letting people show who they are can be more powerful than anything you could say back. Meanwhile, Doug sat alone in his office at Simmons Construction. The blinds were drawn, blocking out the protesters gathered outside. Their signs read, "No racists in our city," and "Hold Doug Simmons accountable." Doug slammed his fist on his desk, the sound echoing in the nearly empty room. Most of his staff had called in sick, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. His phone buzzed relentlessly with calls from reporters and former clients. He ignored them all, his focus on the letter in his hand. His bank had suspended the company's line of credit, citing reputational risk. Without it, Simmons Construction couldn't sustain its current projects. Doug stared at the letter, the words blurring together. The city bid had been his shot at redemption, a multi-million-dollar contract that could have secured his company's future. Now, it was gone. James, back in his office at City Hall, spent the evening reviewing paperwork and reflecting on the day's events. The swift fallout from Doug's actions felt like a step forward, a sign that accountability was no longer optional. Still, there was a lingering sadness, not for Doug, but for the underlying issues his behavior represented. His phone buzzed with a message from a local activist. "Thank you for standing up to hate. You inspire us to keep fighting." James set the phone down, smiling faintly. The incident had reminded him of the responsibility he carried, not just to lead, but to set an example. Sometimes leadership wasn't about grand speeches or sweeping policies. It was about how you handled the moments that tested your character. The next morning, Doug released a video statement from his office. His face was pale, his voice shaking. "I made mistakes," he said. "I let my anger get the best of me, and I deeply regret my actions. To Mayor Parker and the citizens of this city, I am truly sorry." The apology fell flat. The damage was already done, and the public wasn't forgiving. Comments under the video called out his lack of sincerity, accusing him of trying to salvage what little he had left. James watched the video later that day, his expression unreadable. He didn't need to respond. Doug's downfall had spoken for itself. The weeks following the grocery store incident were relentless for Doug Simmons. The initial media firestorm hadn't subsided. If anything, it had intensified. News outlets continued to replay the damning footage, dissecting every word and action. Doug's face had become synonymous with public outrage, his outburst representing everything the city wanted to leave behind. Simmons Construction had officially shut down its offices. Protesters camped outside for days, their chants echoing through the empty halls. The few employees who hadn't resigned outright quietly slipped away, unwilling to be associated with Doug's name. Clients terminated contracts faster than Doug could respond, leaving him scrambling to salvage what little remained of his once thriving business. Meanwhile, preparations for Doug's trial were underway. Charged with assault, disorderly conduct, and verbal harassment, Doug faced mounting legal fees and a grim future. The trial promised to be a public spectacle, with journalists vying for seats in the courtroom and commentators speculating on every angle. James Parker's role as both victim and mayor added a layer of complexity to the proceedings. As a public figure, his every move was scrutinized, yet his calm and measured responses only bolstered his reputation. When asked by reporters if he harbored anger toward Doug, James replied with characteristic poise, "Anger solves nothing. I trust the justice system to handle this fairly. And my focus remains on serving this city." The morning of the pre-trial hearing arrived with brisk fall air and a palpable tension outside the courthouse. Protesters and supporters gathered on opposite sides of the street, their signs and chants competing for dominance. On one side, placards read, "Justice for James" and "Accountability Matters." On the other, a smaller but vocal group clung to signs reading, "Free Doug" and "This is a witch hunt." Doug shuffled into the courthouse, flanked by his lawyer and an assistant carrying a stack of files. His once confident swagger had been replaced by a hunched posture and darting eyes. His suit, though tailored, looked out of place on a man so visibly broken. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. James sat with his legal team near the front, his calm demeanor unchanged. He wore a navy suit, his jaw healed, but the memory of the incident still fresh in his mind. Across the aisle, Doug fidgeted, whispering furiously to his lawyer as the judge entered the room. "Mr. Simmons," the judge began, her voice firm, "you stand accused of assault, verbal harassment, and disorderly conduct. How do you plead?" Doug's lawyer stood, his tone measured. "Not guilty, Your Honor. My client intends to show that he acted out of provocation, and that the events have been misrepresented in the media." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery, but James remained still, his expression unreadable. The judge raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "Very well," she said. "Given the public nature of this case, I am setting a trial date for 2 weeks from today. Both parties will present their evidence, and I will ensure this courtroom remains impartial." As the judge banged her gavel, Doug shot a venomous look across the room at James. James, unfazed, met his gaze briefly before turning to speak quietly with his attorney. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed James as he stepped onto the marble steps. Cameras clicked, and microphones were thrust toward him as questions flew. "Mayor Parker, how do you feel about the trial being so public? Do you think Doug Simmons deserves jail time? Will this incident affect your political future?" James raised a hand, quieting the crowd. "This trial is about accountability, not politics," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I have faith in the legal system to handle this fairly. My focus remains on the work we're doing for the city, and I won't let one incident distract from that." Meanwhile, Doug slipped out a side entrance, flanked by his lawyer and an assistant. He pulled his coat tight against the wind, his face grim as he avoided the cameras waiting for him. Later that evening, James sat in his office at City Hall, reflecting on the day's events. The weight of the upcoming trial loomed large, but he felt confident in his decision to press charges. It wasn't just about the punch. It was about sending a message that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated, no matter who it came from. Across town, Doug sat alone in his dimly lit apartment. His phone, once a constant stream of emails and calls from clients, sat silent on the table beside him. The TV droned in the background, replaying clips from James's courthouse statement. Doug muted it with a frustrated growl, burying his face in his hands. His lawyer had warned him that the trial would likely result in a conviction, given the overwhelming evidence against him. But Doug couldn't shake the feeling that he had been wronged, that somehow this was all someone else's fault. As the city prepared for the trial, the divide between Doug's few remaining supporters and the broader community grew starker. For most, Doug's behavior had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly arrogance and hatred could lead to one's downfall. For James, the trial wasn't just about personal justice. It was an opportunity to reaffirm the city's values and set an example for how to confront hate with dignity and resolve. The courtroom was packed on the first day of Doug Simmons's trial. Rows of onlookers filled the gallery, a mix of journalists, activists, and curious citizens eager to witness the proceedings. The judge, a stern woman with piercing eyes and an air of authority, presided over the courtroom with an unwavering demeanor. Doug sat at the defense table, flanked by his lawyer, his face tight with tension. His once proud demeanor had been replaced by a nervous energy, his fingers tapping anxiously on the table. Across the room, James Parker sat calmly with his legal team, exuding the same quiet confidence that had carried him through the entire ordeal. The prosecution opened with a compelling statement, painting a clear picture of Doug's actions that night. "This is not a case of misunderstanding or misjudgment," the prosecutor said. "This is a case of deliberate aggression, fueled by prejudice and anger. The defendant not only verbally harassed the mayor, but escalated his hostility to a physical assault." Doug's lawyer countered, attempting to shift the narrative. "This case is about context," he argued. "My client was provoked, subjected to an environment that led to an unfortunate lapse in judgment. He regrets his actions deeply and asks for your understanding." The first witnesses were called, starting with Kendra, the grocery store employee who had been at the center of the confrontation. Dressed professionally, she approached the stand with a calm yet resolute demeanor. "Kendra," the prosecutor began. "Can you describe what you witnessed that night?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady. Doug Simmons started yelling at Mayor Parker in the self-checkout area. He made several racist comments and got more aggressive when the mayor didn't respond the way he wanted. It wasn't long before he shoved him and then punched him. The defense attorney stood, his tone probing. "Kendra, would you say that tensions were already high in the store that evening? Perhaps both parties were irritable?" Kendra didn't flinch. "No. The only one who was out of control was Mr. Simmons. Mayor Parker didn't raise his voice once. He kept calm the entire time." The next witnesses were shoppers who had recorded the altercation. Their videos played on a large screen, the courtroom silent except for the harsh sound of Doug's voice echoing from the speakers. Each clip captured the insults, the slurs, and the punch that brought the confrontation to its peak. The defense lawyer tried to frame Doug's outburst as a moment of poor judgment rather than malicious intent, but the evidence was damning. Each new video, each witness account, painted a picture of a man consumed by his own anger and prejudice. When Doug took the stand, the tension in the room thickened. He adjusted his tie nervously, his eyes darting between the judge, the jury, and James. "Mr. Simmons," his lawyer began, "can you tell us what was going through your mind that night?" Doug took a deep breath, his voice shaking. "I was frustrated. I had a bad day. And when I saw Mayor Parker, I didn't even know who he was. I let my emotions get the better of me. I'm sorry for what I said and what I did." The prosecutor rose, her expression sharp. "Mr. Simmons, are you saying that the racial slurs you used were a result of a bad day?" Doug hesitated, fumbling for words. "No, I didn't mean them. I was just angry. And the punch? Was that just a bad day too?" Doug swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. "I wasn't thinking." When James was called to testify, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Taking the stand, he maintained his characteristic composure, his voice steady and deliberate as he recounted the events. "Mayor Parker," the prosecutor asked, "how did you respond to Mr. Simmons's verbal attacks that night?" "I remained calm," James replied. "I didn't engage with his insults because I didn't want to escalate the situation. My focus was on de-escalation, but unfortunately, Mr. Simmons chose to escalate it himself." The defense attorney attempted to paint James as patronizing, suggesting his calm demeanor could have been perceived as condescending. James responded with quiet authority. "Choosing to stay calm isn't condescension," he said. "It's restraint. I didn't want anyone to get hurt that night, including Mr. Simmons." The prosecutor's closing argument was concise and powerful. "This case is about accountability. Mr. Simmons's actions were deliberate, and they had consequences. No one is above the law, and his position as a business owner does not exempt him from responsibility." Doug's lawyer, visibly flustered by the overwhelming evidence, made a final plea for leniency. "My client has learned from his mistakes. He deeply regrets his actions and asks for your understanding as he works to make amends." As the jury deliberated, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Doug sat stiffly in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table. James, meanwhile, waited patiently, his calm demeanor never wavering. After several hours, the jury returned with their verdict. The foreperson rose, clearing her throat as she read aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Douglas Simmons, guilty on all charges." The judge's gavel struck the wood, signaling the end of the trial. Doug's shoulders sagged as the weight of the verdict settled over him. As James left the courtroom, reporters swarmed him with questions. "Mayor Parker, how do you feel about the verdict?" James paused, his voice firm but measured. "Justice was served today. I hope this case serves as a reminder that words and actions have consequences. We all have a responsibility to treat each other with respect, regardless of our differences." He stepped into the brisk air outside the courthouse, the crowd parting to let him through. For Doug Simmons, the trial was over, but the consequences of his actions were just beginning. Doug Simmons sat in his dimly lit apartment, the walls closing in on him as the events of the past few weeks replayed endlessly in his mind. The once pristine space was now cluttered with unopened mail, takeout containers, and empty beer bottles. The only light came from the muted television, which still flickered with clips of his trial. His name had become a punchline, his face the symbol of public disgrace. He stared blankly at the screen, watching the news anchor summarize his downfall. Doug Simmons, the former owner of Simmons Construction, was found guilty on all charges in his highly publicized trial. The conviction marks the end of a man once considered a respected business figure in the city, now reduced to a cautionary tale of anger and prejudice. Doug's jaw clenched, his teeth grinding audibly. Respected? He had been more than respected. He had been successful, powerful. He built things, real things, while people like James Parker sat behind desks making speeches. How could everything have unraveled so quickly? He grabbed his beer bottle and hurled it across the room, watching it shatter against the wall. The sound barely registered over the pounding in his ears. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was the victim here. That smug mayor had set him up, turned everyone against him. Doug stood abruptly, pacing the room. His mind raced with thoughts of revenge, of ways to reclaim his reputation. He couldn't let this be the end. But every avenue he considered was blocked. His company was gone, his contracts canceled, his bank accounts frozen. The city had blacklisted him, and no one would take his calls. The protests outside his apartment had only just stopped, though he still couldn't bring himself to go outside. The few times he had tried, someone recognized him. A neighbor, a stranger on the street, and the glares and muttered insults sent him scurrying back inside. Even his closest allies had abandoned him. His business partners had issued a public statement distancing themselves, and his lawyer had quietly suggested he stop calling after the trial ended. Doug was alone, and he hated every second of it. His phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with another notification. He snatched it, expecting another barrage of hate-filled messages or mocking memes. Instead, it was a news alert. Simmons Construction officially declares bankruptcy following court verdict. Doug's grip tightened on the phone as he read the headline, his hands shaking with rage. Bankruptcy. His legacy reduced to a headline. The company he had spent decades building was gone, its name now synonymous with failure and disgrace. He slammed the phone down, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. If James Parker hadn't been there that night, if Doug hadn't been provoked, none of this would have happened. Doug's thoughts spiraled further, his mind grasping for someone to blame. The mayor, the store clerk, the bystanders with their phones, all of them had conspired against him. They wanted to see him fall. He stormed over to his desk, pulling open a drawer and rifling through its contents. Amidst old papers and scattered office supplies, he found the business card James Parker had handed him that night, the one that revealed his true identity. Doug stared at the card, his vision blurring with anger. The smooth lettering, James Parker, Mayor, seemed to mock him. He clenched the card tightly in his fist, crumpling it as if that would erase the man's name from his life. His mind churned with fantasies of confrontation, of walking into City Hall and demanding an audience. He imagined shouting down James in front of his staff, exposing the man for what he believed him to be, a fraud, a manipulator. But reality clawed its way back into Doug's thoughts. He knew he had no power left. No one would listen to him. The courts had already spoken, the public had moved on, and James Parker was untouchable. The realization hit Doug like a physical blow, his knees buckling as he sank into the nearest chair. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent rage. For the first time, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered what he had refused to acknowledge. This wasn't anyone else's fault. The words, the actions, the punch, those were his choices. But that voice was drowned out almost immediately by the familiar swell of indignation. No, he thought bitterly. They'd pushed him to it. They'd forced his hand. Doug sat there for hours, lost in his own toxic cycle of blame and denial. The world outside moved on without him, his name slowly fading from headlines, but never forgotten. He was now a cautionary tale, a symbol of the consequences of unchecked anger and entitlement. In his solitude, Doug fumed, plotting imaginary comebacks that would never materialize. His downfall wasn't just financial or professional. It was personal, a spiral of bitterness that he refused to escape. Meanwhile, James Parker continued his work, his name associated not with the confrontation, but with his leadership and dignity. The city saw Doug Simmons for what he had shown himself to be, and they moved forward, leaving him behind. The city seemed to breathe easier in the weeks following the trial. The noise of Doug Simmons's downfall had faded into the background, replaced by stories of progress and hope. James Parker had returned to his daily routine as mayor, his focus on community projects and initiatives to address the very issues the confrontation had highlighted. Sitting at his desk late one evening, James reviewed the latest reports on city projects. The once contentious bid Simmons Construction had submitted was now void, and the contract had been awarded to a smaller, minority-owned firm with a strong reputation for quality and fairness. The decision had been met with widespread approval, a symbolic moment for the city's commitment to integrity. James leaned back in his chair, gazing out of the window at the skyline illuminated by the city lights. His mind wandered to the events that had brought him here: the grocery store, the trial, and the media frenzy. It had been exhausting, but it had also been necessary. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. His chief of staff, Angela, stepped in, holding a folder. "Mayor Parker, these are the final reports on the Simmons case. Thought you'd want to see them." James nodded, taking the folder. "Thank you, Angela. Anything else?" Angela hesitated. "Just a note. The city council wanted me to remind you how much they appreciate your handling of all this. It wasn't easy, but you set an example." James smiled faintly. "That's kind of them, but it wasn't just me. It was the community, the witnesses, the people who spoke up. They made it clear what kind of city we want to be." Angela left, and James opened the folder, skimming the pages. The details were straightforward. Doug had been sentenced to community service and a hefty fine. His appeals were likely to fail given the overwhelming evidence. Simmons Construction was officially dissolved, and Doug's personal finances were in ruins. The once proud businessman was now a man defined by his fall, a cautionary tale of arrogance and prejudice. Across town, Doug sat alone in his apartment. The protests outside had stopped, but the silence was more damning. His phone remained quiet. No calls from allies or clients. The few friends who had stood by him initially had slowly distanced themselves, unwilling to share in his disgrace. He scrolled through social media, each post and comment another stab at his wounded pride. Clips of the trial were still circulating, accompanied by sharp critiques of his behavior. Some posts mocked him mercilessly, while others dissected his actions with cold detachment. Doug's hand trembled as he closed the app, the weight of his choices pressing down on him like a physical force. The city had moved on, but Doug hadn't. He clung to his bitterness, his anger at James Parker festering with each passing day. Yet deep down, beneath the layers of blame and denial, a small part of him knew the truth. He had done this to himself. The realization was fleeting, quickly drowned out by another wave of indignation. James, meanwhile, found himself at the grocery store one evening, returning to the place where it had all begun. As he walked through the aisles, he exchanged smiles and nods with shoppers. Many recognized him and offered words of support. At the self-checkout station, Kendra, the cashier from that fateful night, approached him. "Mayor Parker," she said with a wide grin, "it's good to see you again." James returned the smile. "Kendra, I hope things have been quieter since that night." She laughed softly. "Quieter? Yes, but I'll never forget it. You handled yourself with so much grace. Not many people could have done that." James's expression turned thoughtful. Sometimes the best response to anger is calm. Letting people reveal who they are is more powerful than any argument. Kendra nodded, her admiration clear. Well, I just wanted to say thank you for standing up for what's right and for showing everyone how to handle hate with dignity. James paid for his items and left the store, the cool evening air greeting him as he stepped outside. He paused for a moment, looking up at the stars scattered across the night sky. The confrontation, the trial, and Doug's downfall were chapters of a story that had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated. But they had also reinforced his belief in the city's potential for growth and accountability. As he walked to his car, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from a young activist he had met during a recent community event. Thank you for everything, Mayor Parker. You've shown us how to lead with strength and grace. James smiled, slipping the phone back into his pocket. The work was far from over, but moments like this reminded him why he had taken on the responsibility in the first place. Leadership wasn't just about policies or speeches. It was about showing up, standing firm, and setting an example, even when it wasn't easy. Doug Simmons had fallen, his own actions bringing him to ruin. But James's focus wasn't on the past or on Doug's failures. It was on the future and the people of his city, who deserved leaders who stood for justice, integrity, and hope. With that thought, James started his car and drove into the night, ready to face whatever came next.